All right, I've got my big bay door open so that I can actually have more internet access. So anyways, it's very windy, so hopefully this audio is decent enough. I do have a good mic, and I'm tired of that light on my mic flashing me and you in the face, so I've covered it. Is what it is. All right, so let's get going on Gemini or the ENTJ. We are going to be talking about reintegration of Gemini's 4 quadrants through the astro. So we've got astro-psychology going on here. We've got astrology and psychology combined with my 3-axis system. We're talking about the overall masculine and feminine of the archetype, moral load bearing or lack thereof, and then the inner and outer feminine quadrants, development through childhood, and the distortion order. And so this video is going to be talking about how to reintegrate each quadrant after 30 years old. So welcome back to the channel. I am Heather with Underwater Panther. So if you're new here, I need to ground what this space actually is, because this is not surface level astrology and it's not generic personality content. What we're building here is a full system for understanding how human beings actually process reality, how we perceive it, how we carry it, how we define it, and how we act inside of it. Every video on this channel is a part of that larger structure. Nothing stands alone and everything connects. So I do have many books. I've got probably 35 books written at this point, talking all about the 12 astro-psychological personality types. And so check those out on my website. And I also have playlist for each archetype, as well as some other series going on, generational, Native American teachings, etc. So I've got a lot going on in this channel. So at the core of this work, there are 3 layers that we keep returning to over and over. So I'm going to bring that key card up. And Gemini, I'm going to make smaller and put it in the corner so you can have visuals of running through the axes that I am currently working on through each of the personality types. Okay, so at the core of this work, there are 3 layers that we keep returning to over and over again. The first is the masculine and feminine overall axis, which is not about gender. It's about direction of force. It shows whether a system naturally moves outward through structure, action, and definition, or inward through integration, attunement, and meaning making. The second is the moral load-bearing axis, which tracks how a system carries consequence. Does it retain pressure and build weight over time, or does it process, release, and move? And the third is the quadrant system, inner feminine, inner masculine, outer feminine, outer masculine, which breaks down the exact sequence of how reality is processed step by step. So what you're watching on this channel is not personality typing for entertainment, it's architecture. It's how identity forms, how distortion develops, how people get stuck, and how they actually reintegrate. We go through all 12 archetypes using this framework, breaking down their development from childhood into adulthood, mapping where each quadrant comes online, where sequence gets distorted, and where pressure either builds or gets discharged. And most importantly, we track what happens after 30 when life stops rewarding raw ability and starts requiring structure, continuity, and identity. Because intelligence is not the issue for most people. Sequence is where something enters the system, where it gets processed, where it gets defined, and whether it actually gets held long enough to become something real. That's what determines whether someone builds a life or just moves through one. And this is also why this channel goes beyond individual psychology into larger systems, because the same patterns that shape a person internally are the same patterns you see playing out culturally, politically, religiously, and relationally. When identity forms incorrectly or attaches to the wrong structures, you get distorted at scale. You get identity capture. You get people defending what they fused with instead of evaluating what is actually true. So, as you move through this content, don't just listen to it as information. Watch the patterns, watch the sequence, watch where things are being held and where they're being released too quickly. Because once you see the structure, you don't just understand yourself differently, you understand everything differently. And from that point forward, you're not just reacting to reality, you can actually start organizing it. All right, so before we get into Gemini after 30, so it's important to ground where we just came from. So we just came from Aquarius, talking about Aquarius, and now we are on to Gemini. So I just want to do a brief comparison. So before we move into Gemini after 30, it's important to ground where we just came from because this is not a disconnected analysis. The last video closed the loop on Aquarius, and what that revealed was not a flaw in intelligence, not a lack of awareness, and not a failure to perceive reality correctly. The issue was sequence. Aquarius was seen too early. So let me actually bring up the master key card. I kind of like to do an overview in my introductions. I'm starting to do that in every video. I think it's important. Where is my master key card at? There it is. I went right by it. All right, so I'm going to bring this up on screen. My computer is going so slow. That's why I had to open my Baydor. Eventually, I'm going to have to get Starlink, I think. I am desperately needing to get the internet. Okay, so Aquarius. Here is their key card. Whoops, I pushed on the wrong thing. Key card. All right, so I'm just going to leave this up here as I talk so you can kind of see that for visual reference. Okay, so let me get back to where I was. All right, so Aquarius. The last video closed the loop on Aquarius, and what that revealed was not a flaw in intelligence, not a lack of awareness, and not a failure to perceive reality correctly. The issue was sequence. Aquarius was seen too early, defining too early, connecting too late, and acting after the moment had already moved. So even when they were right, they didn't land. Not because the insight was wrong, but because it was out of order. The entire reintegration process for Aquarius was about correcting that timing. So you've got extroverted sensing inferior. The entire reintegration process for Aquarius was correcting the timing, allowing reality to land before patterning it, so the NISE axis, allowing connection before explanation with TE and FI, allowing the truth to remain open before finalizing it with the TE quadrant, and learning to act before everything felt complete, so with the SE and TE. Aquarius did not need more intelligence. They needed alignment between perception, connection, and action. After this section, I'm actually going to compare the air signs and go a little bit deeper into the male and female reintegration because it is different according to, being a woman or a man. So now Gemini presents a completely different structural problem. Going to get to Gemini's key here. All right, so Gemini presents a completely different structural problem. And if you carry the Aquarius lens into this, you will misread it. Aquarius lives ahead of reality and has to come back into sequence. Gemini lives inside reality from the very beginning, but it does not stabilize inside itself. It has already engaged, already processed, already spoken, and already organized in real time. The issue is not delay. The issue is direction. Gemini does not struggle because they wait too long. They struggle because they move without anchoring. So where Aquarius was right but mistimed, Gemini is in motion but unanchored. That distinction changes everything because it completely changes what reintegration requires. So this video is not about slowing Gemini down in the way Aquarius had to slow down. Gemini already moves in real time and adapts quickly to what is in front of them. They engage, process, respond, and understand without needing withdrawal first. Those are not weaknesses, those are strengths. But what becomes visible after 30 is that engagement alone does not build anything if nothing is being held long enough to stabilize. Gemini can understand everything, communicate effectively, and move through complex environments, but will still feel a lack of continuity underneath all of that movement. The system is active but not consolidating. It is responsive but not anchoring, and over time that creates a gap between capability and structure. So what we are doing in this video is not reducing Gemini's movement, we are reorganizing it. We are looking at what happens after 30 when the system can no longer rely on adaptability alone, and life begins requiring continuity. So I'm going to bring this down for a moment, and I'm probably just going to actually do this. All right, so we're going to move through all 4 quadrants again, but now through reintegration. An inner feminine pattern recognition stops expanding endlessly and begins narrowing into direction. An inner masculine identity finally forms through sustained choice instead of ongoing interpretation. An outer feminine connection shifts from moment-based engagement into continuity and depth. And an outer masculine action stops resetting with each new input and begins compounding into something that actually builds over time. At the same time, we are tracking moral load throughout this process because Gemini does not carry weight the way most systems do, nervous systems. Gemini processes, releases, and moves. Reintegration is not about forcing Gemini to become a high retention nervous system. It is about teaching Gemini how to hold just enough, just long enough for consequence, meaning, and identity to actually form. So after this series, we begin to expand into something much bigger. So I'm going to take this key card down briefly and talk about where we are going because I'm actually pretty excited. All right, so this is where the series begins to expand into something much bigger because what we are building here is not just personality breakdown. This is system architecture. The next phase of this series moves directly into identity capture. And if you do not understand what that is, you will misread almost everything happening at scale right now. So I do want to bring this back into culture, politics, religion, educational, and relationships. So identity capture was what happens when a person's sense of self fuses with a belief system, a role, a group, a narrative, or an external structure to the point where they can no longer separate what they think from who they are. It is no longer, this is something I believe. It becomes, this is who I am. And once that happens, once that fusion happens, the system stops evaluating reality openly. It begins defending identity instead. Information is no longer processed for accuracy, it is filtered for threat. That changes the belief. Anything that changes the belief feels like a threat to the self, not just a disagreement in perspective. This matters culturally because large groups begin organizing around identity instead of truth. People no longer gather around shared inquiry, they gather around shared positioning. And once identity is attached, those positions become rigid, not because they are correct, but because they are protecting something deeper than logic. You start seeing fragmentation, polarization, and group level distortion. Not simply because people disagree, but because they cannot afford to question what they are attached to. So, identity capture matters politically because capture turns systems of governance into systems of allegiance. People stop evaluating policies, outcomes, or structures independently and instead align themselves with identities that must be defended. Dialogue collapses into opposition, complexity collapses into sides, and the ability to update, refine, or correct direction weakens because changing your mind no longer feels like growth, it feels like self betrayal. And then identity capture matters religiously because belief systems that were meant to provide meaning, structure, and orientation can become fused with identity in a way that blocks deeper understanding. Instead of faith being something lived and explored, it becomes something protected and enforced. Questioning becomes dangerous, interpretation becomes fixed. And the system loses its ability to evolve, not because truth is static, but because identity has attached itself to one version of it. Identity capture matters educationally because learning itself becomes compromised when identity is involved. If a student cannot separate what they believe from who they are, then new information is not evaluated. It is either accepted or rejected based on whether it aligns with their existing identity structure. Curiosity decreases and exploration narrows, and education shifts from discovery into reinforcement. And identity capture matters deeply in relationships because it prevents real connection. When someone is fused with a position, they are not fully present with the other person. They are defending, projecting, or filtering. Are interacting through identity rather than relating through openness. Conversations become performances, listening becomes selective, and intimacy breaks down because nothing new can actually enter the system without being filtered through what must be maintained. So, when we move into identity capture across all 12 archetypes, we're not just talking about abstract theory, we are mapping exactly how each system becomes vulnerable to losing itself inside what it engages with. And we're going to track that through the same 3 layers we've been building this entire system on. So, the 3 layers. So the masculine and feminine axis, which tells us how the system moves under pressure, the moral load-bearing axis, which tells us how it carries and releases consequence, and the inner and outer masculine and feminine quadrants, which show the exact sequence through which reality is processed, defined, and acted on. Because identity capture does not happen randomly, it happens when these systems fall out of alignment. So when one quadrant OBS drives me nuts with moving stuff around. All right, so when one quadrant overrides the other, or when the sequence collapses in a way that replaces internal structure with external attachment. This is why this matters for Gemini specifically, because Gemini does not get captured the way high retention nervous systems do. It does not anchor deeply into one belief and defend it rigidly. Gemini gets captured through movement without anchoring, through constant engagement without selection, through processing everything and holding nothing. And that creates a different kind of vulnerability, not rigidity, but lack of internal structure. So as we move into Gemini after 30, the focus is not just on what the system is doing, it is on what it's actually holding, what it is building, and what it is allowing to become identity. All right, so that is where I am moving into next. So I do want to talk about the 3 Air sign archetypes. Okay, so now I'm going to have to get back to where I was. Okay, so we're going to be moving back into talking about reintegration of Gemini after 30, dealing with the inner and outer masculine and feminine quadrants, moral load, overall masculine and feminine ranking, and astrology and psychology. Okay, so grounding back into talking about reintegrating our inner and outer masculine and feminine after 30 years old. So psychologically, they say that the TE hero quadrant, we start developing extroverted thinking hero and Mercury ruling for Gemini in the outer masculine first through the ages of 1 and 12. And then we start working on inner feminine with North Node and NI parent for Gemini 12 to 20 years old. And then we start getting into the outer feminine with SD child and Jupiter in left field between 20 and 30 years old or so. In the inferior with South Node and introverted feeling inferior in the inner masculine 30 through 35. So this video, we are talking about reintegration after 30. All right, so I do want to pull up Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius. Actually, where am I? I'm going to do it this way so I'm not as crowded. Okay, so there we have Gemini, the baby of the air signs. We have Libra, the middle child of the air signs, and Aquarius, the eldest of the air signs. Okay, so Gemini, Libra, and Aquarius, the air signs, the intellectuals. So this is fascinating because I started really looking into the differences between men and women with reintegration after the age of 30. What do all the air signs have in common? So they all show identity and stability themes, but they do not struggle for the same reason, and they do not struggle at the same depth or in the same way. So Gemini and Aquarius, excuse me, both have introverted feeling in more unconscious positions. So they are more unconscious of their identity, anchoring into their identity. So, and then Libra has FE child with Mars. I would say that Libras are probably the most people pleasing of the air signs. But anyway, so this is dealing with FI and FE, the internal emotional world, values, standing on who you are through your values, what you believe in. So they all prioritize external processing through air element logic over internal anchoring, with the FI or FE and more unconscious quadrant. So we're better at our hero and parent. And when we get into our child and inferior cognitive functions or left field and fall, according to astrology, it's harder to be conscious within ourselves of those cognitive functions and planetary imprints. And we start developing those later in life, so they aren't as refined. All right, so identity forms after interaction, not before. But the mechanism of distortion is different in each. So what they share, the real common denominator, air systems, the intellectuals regulate through cognition, interaction, pattern recognition, and relational or conceptual exchange. So instead of asking, who am I first, they ask, what is happening here? How does this work? How does this connect? Identity becomes secondary. That's the shared vulnerability. But here's the critical distinction. My computer is glitching regardless of my door being open or not. All right, so they are not all weak in identity in the same way. So when we're starting to try to understand psychology, like just really psychological and spiritual, mental, emotional growth, human development through these systems, you're starting to really understand your own identity, your own self. Normally, that's where you should start is understanding what are your values, like what am I dominant in, what am I weak in. Once you start really truly working on integration within yourself, you are really truly focused on identity. This is what this is about. All right, so Gemini, identity delay with FI, inferior. So Gemini doesn't start with identity at all. Gemini engages, processes, explores, and adapts with the TE hero outer masculine. And only last they ask, what do I actually believe? So FI inferior is in the inferior position. So the issue is identity comes too late. This creates identity drift, inconsistency, adaptive self, and difficulty committing. Gemini doesn't lack identity, they just never anchored in it early enough. So Libra is the identity negotiation. FI is FE, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. FE child can be oppositional and suppressed. So Libra or the ENTP is different. Libra is consistently aware of identity, but it is relationally negotiated. They ask what is right between us, what maintains harmony. So identity is not delayed, it is adjusted. This creates people-pleasing tendencies, over-calibration to others, internal conflict between self versus harmony, and difficulty choosing self when they disrupt balance. Libra doesn't lack identity. They compromise identity to maintain equilibrium. So Aquarius is identity pre-definition. So Aquarius has FI child and sun in left field, but after structure with their inner masculine TE parent. So Aquarius is the opposite of Gemini. They do not delay identity. They lock it too early internally. So Geminis are probably that would be a hard call. I would consider Geminis being more outwardly extroverted, masculine wise. Outward, I would say between Libra and Gemini, they are outward. Gemini is more outwardly masculine. Relationally, Libra would be outwardly more feminine, feeling relationally. And Aquarius, they're dealing with their inner feminine first and their inner masculine. So it's really hard to get in and break through Aquarian walls. They don't open up like Libra and Gemini do. Yeah, so that's interesting. Libra and Gemini both lead with outer masculine, but Gemini's is more about efficiency, organizing, CEO type of like energy, execution, communication. Libras, they are literally their outer masculine is extroverted intuition and Venus ruling, so it comes off very feminine at first. All right, so anyways, Aquarius is the opposite of Gemini. So Aquarius is dealing with their internal world with pattern recognition, and then inner masculine with their execution and order and control. Really, TE is a lot about controlling the outer environment. So anywho, Aquarius is the opposite of Gemini. They don't delay identity, they lock it too early internally. They perceive patterns, define systems, then forms values. So identity becomes internally fixed, externally untested. This creates detachment, rigidity in perspective, feeling misunderstood, and difficulty updating based on lived interaction. Aquarius does not lack identity. They form identity before fully engaging reality. So the real pattern is Gemini, late identity formation, Libra, externally negotiated identity, and Aquarius, internally preformed identity. So why this happens? Air prioritizes movement, thought, and connection. but identity requires stillness, selection, and internal commitment. So air signs naturally delay stillness, avoid premature commitment, keep options or perspectives open, which creates instability unless consciously corrected. So major difference in severity. Not all are equal here. So Gemini has the weakest identity anchoring because Fi is in inferior and last in sequence. Libra has conflicted identity anchoring because harmony competes with self. Aquarius has premature identity anchoring but disconnected from real-time reality. So air signs don't start with identity, but each mishandles identity in a different phase of the sequence. Gemini never anchors it early, Libra negotiates it away, and Aquarius locks it before testing it. The correction for each: Gemini must choose and hold. Libra, choose self even if harmony breaks. Aquarius, engage before finalizing. So it's not that intellectual systems lack identity. It's that they trust understanding over becoming. It's the information. An identity only forms when something is chosen, held, and lived repeatedly. So I thought that was very interesting. What else did I want to? So I wanted to compare the, let me see which, okay. I've got a lot of things I'm pulling from at the moment. Okay, so I do want to compare, all right, so I do want to talk about, actually I want to do this other one first. So Aquarius versus Gemini. I'm going to have to shut this door. It's actually pretty cold. I turned my heat all the way down. Sorry, I've got my bay door open. I've got allergies like crazy. Did I turn this all the way off? What's going on here? I don't think I tripped anything. Uh-oh. Give me a moment. My heater is acting funky. Oh, my electricity actually tripped. That's the first time that's happened in forever. I've got extension cords out in my industrial farm equipment shed, and I have a heating blanket and a space heater. All right, we're slowly moving up in the world. Eventually, I'll get the internet. Okay, so Aquarius versus Gemini. Aquarius and Gemini are often grouped together because they are both air systems, both highly cognitive, and both capable of understanding complexity at a level most archetypes cannot. But structurally, they are almost opposites. Aquarius is an internal first system. It begins in inner feminine with pattern recognition, then immediately moves into inner masculine to define and structure what it sees. By the time it engages reality externally, it has already formed a model. It does not discover reality through engagement. It maps reality before entering it. Gemini is an external first system. It begins in outer masculine through engagement, communication, and real-time processing. It organizes while moving, explores through contact, and only later attempts to define itself internally. It does not map reality first. Gemini discovers reality through interaction. So at the most fundamental level, Aquarius, they perceive, define, and engage late. Gemini engages, explores, and defines late. Aquarius stabilizes internally and delays reality. Gemini stabilizes externally and delays identity. So the masculine and feminine axis, direction of force. Jeez. All right, let me get comfy here. This is just okay. I'm not really sure how I want to set. This is gonna be a long video. Okay. I might actually break this into a bridge video and then cap it and then go into Gemini's inner and outer masculine and feminine integration after 30. Anyways, I wanted to talk about this. This is extremely fascinating for me. I do have an Aquarian mind, and this stuff is just my jam. All right, so Aquarius sits more masculine leaning overall. It prefers structure, direction, and internal definition. Even when it is quiet, even when Aquarius is quiet, they are still deciding. Aquarius has a directional bias even if they delay action. Gemini sits in an androgynous bridge range. So they go both ways, masculine and feminine. It's Jekyll and Hyde. They're the twins. You never know what you're going to get. So Gemini shifts between masculine and feminine fluidity. They can organize, receive, adapt, and translate, but does not naturally hold one direction. They move between them based on context. They sit on the fence with everything. All right, so this creates a key difference. Aquarius has direction without timing. Gemini has movement without direction. All right, so I'm not sure if I'm going to actually talk about Libra again, so I'm just going to do this. I love seeing that like glow for some reason. Okay, we're going to keep the glow because it's fun. All right, so the top one is Gemini. Okay, I put the symbol on there. Okay, so this creates a key difference. Aquarius has direction without timing. Gemini has movement without direction. Aquarius knows what it thinks but may not act. Gemini acts constantly but may not know what they stand on. So moral load, how consequences carried. This is one of the most important distinctions. Aquarius has moderate to structured moral load. It does not carry emotional weight like high retention systems, but they do retain structural consequence. Once they understand something, they hold that understanding. Aquarius builds internal coherence. They remember patterns and incorporates patterns into their model. Gemini has the lowest moral retention in the system. So Gemini processes, understands, and releases. They move on quickly, not because they don't care, but because its nervous system resolves through motion. So Aquarius, I understand this and it stays. Gemini, I understand this and I move on. Aquarius builds internal structure over time. Gemini resets unless it consciously holds. So the distortion path side by side. Aquarius distortion is inner feminine, inner masculine, outer feminine, outer masculine. Aquarius sees early, defines early, connects late, and acts late. The distortion is premature internal finalization. Aquarius completes reality internally before reality has fully unfolded externally. The Gemini distortion is outer masculine, outer feminine, and then inner masculine, late. Gemini engages immediately, tracks patterns after, explores widely, and defines last. The distortion is lack of internal anchoring. Gemini moves through reality without consolidating identity. So the male comparison between Aquarius and Gemini. So Aquarius men struggle most with timing of action. They know what's correct, see outcomes early, and build accurate models. But they hesitate to act, delay execution, and miss windows. Their failure is I knew, but I didn't move. The strength here is precision, foresight, and structural intelligence. The weakness is inaction, delayed impact, and lack of force. Gemini men struggle most with direction of action. They act quickly, adapt constantly, communicate, and execute in real time, but don't commit, shift direction, and fail to build long term. Their failure is I moved, but I didn't build. The strength here is adaptability, responsiveness, and execution. The weakness is inconsistency, lack of follow through, and no accumulation. So the core difference, Aquarius men, direction without execution. Gemini men, execution without direction. So reintegration here, Aquarian men must act before full certainty, tolerate imperfect execution, and enter reality sooner. Gemini men must choose before full exploration, commit before certainty, and stay in one direction. So now the female comparison here with reintegration after 30 is what we're talking about. I just want to do a little comparison and with the personality types as well as the male and female, what they are dealing with. So female comparisons between Aquarius versus Gemini. So Aquarian women struggle with relational timing. FI child, sun in left field. They understand others deeply, see emotional patterns clearly, form internal conclusions early, but engage late, connect after defining, and feel distant to others. Their failure is I understood, but I didn't meet you in time. The strength is clarity, emotional independence, and pattern awareness. Weakness is perceived coldness, relational delay, and emotional distance. Gemini women struggle most with identity continuity. They connect easily, adapt socially, understand people in real time, but shift across environments, lack consistent internal stance, and struggle to maintain relational depth. Their failure is I connect, but I didn't stay consistent. Strength here is relational intelligence, adaptability, and communication. The weakness is inconsistency, a lack of depth, and identity drift. So, the core difference between the Aquarian and Gemini women, Aquarius women have internal clarity without relational timing. Gemini women have relational engagement without internal consistency. So, reintegration, Aquarian women must engage emotionally before defining, stay in the moment without resolving it, and allow others to reveal themselves. I can't tell if the outside light got turned off. Oh, no. Okay. I thought the outdoor light got turned off. Okay, the porch light. Anyways, Gemini women must define herself before adapting, hold identity across context, and deepen instead of rotating connection. So, moral load in real life. This is where their behavior is most misunderstood. An Aquarius man or woman will remember patterns, build internal conclusions, and carry structural understanding forward. So, when they don't act or connect, it's not because they didn't process, it's because they already completed the process internally. A Gemini man or woman will process quickly, understand fully, release, and move on. So when they don't follow through, it's not because they didn't understand, it's because they didn't retain an anchor. This creates opposite relational misreads. So Aquarius is seen as distant, slow, and over analytical. Gemini is seen as inconsistent, scattered, and non committal. Aquarius and Gemini are both high intelligence systems, but their failure modes are inverse. Aquarius builds internally, delays externally, holds too early, and moves late. Gemini moves externally, delays internally, releases too fast, and defines too late. So, the real truth Aquarius must learn reality is not finished when you understand it. Gemini must learn reality does not build unless you hold it. So the final integrated states, Aquarius integrated sees clearly, connects in time, acts with presence, and brings insight into reality. Gemini integrated engages fully, selects intentionally, holds consistently, and builds over time. And when both are integrated, Aquarius becomes accurate and effective. Gemini becomes adaptive and stable. So that's the full polarity. One learns to enter reality sooner, the other learns to stay in reality longer. And both finally become systems that don't just understand life, but actually participate in building it. All right, so I'm going to get into that in a later video. What else do I want to talk about? All right, so I'm kind of trying to figure out how I'm going to cap this off. I think I'm going to include this into... Yeah, okay. So I'm going to actually... What am I at? 44 minutes? Yeah, okay. All right, so I'm going to cap this video here. Make sure I didn't miss anything. I'm going to make... I feel like I should do this for Aquarius as well. So this, I'm going to turn that note into a different video, actually. And... yeah. All right. So I feel like this is a good stopping point for this. So I just wanted to kind of compare some of the air signs, some of them, all of them, excuse me. I just wanted to compare the air signs and the reintegration comparisons between men and women. So that was fascinating to me. And anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. This actually turned out like I'm going to be filming another probably hour and a half. And then I'm going to close out Gemini and move into my identity capture series. I'm very excited about it. So yeah, stay tuned. Feel free to leave your thoughts and feelings in the comment section. Feel free to check out my ebooks. I do have a master playlist, a video playlist here on YouTube for Geminis. And I can't remember how many videos are in that playlist. But yeah, check out my ebooks. All of that will be in the description below. And I will see you in the next video.